Welcome to Shorty SuperCoach. Let's dissect the back line. We've done plenty of player profiles. We've looked at overall structure. We've run our eyes over many players through all positions. But I thought, how can we really get stuck into each line? And people request certain players and I can't always get to them. And people ask questions about this and structure and whatnot and different types of players and how many premiums here and there and mid-prices, etc. So I thought I'd take a real in-depth look, and I thought the best way to involve it all was to talk about all the players that are relevant through SuperCoach. We'll start with the back line, obviously, but people talk player comparisons. They're always very popular because people in their own minds are always weighing up certain guys against each other. What I thought I'd do would be rank each player in certain categories. So for example, I've got 5 blokes that I think we should be selecting a few of for premiums, 4 fellas in the second tier premiums, then I've got 8 guys in the breakout contenders, and then I've got another 4 fellas in a mid-price category. So basically how I'll be doing it is ranking them from who I think is the best selection of that crop down to the worst, or the least might be a bit better way to describe it. So I've scrolled through all the defenders and picked out guys that are relevant, basically people I think are relevant or who have more than 5% ownership. So we'll start with the premiums, and in terms of structure, how I'm going, and I guess that's all I can really advise because I'm going fairly light on in the back line. I think we need to have plenty of depth through that forward line given the lack of rookies that we have on offer, particularly valid scoring ones. And in contrast to that, there's plenty of defenders who look like they'll have great job security as well as upside in the scoring. So plenty of rookies to offer up there. So I'm rolling with what you would say, what I have categorised here is 1 genuine premium, 2 second tier premiums who I feel are capable of pumping it up, and then I've got 3 rookies. I won't talk about the rookies off the top. I'll have a separate video, but that's basically the general idea of these videos. I hope you like it. I've enjoyed putting this one together. Plenty of stats, plenty of research, and I think it's a one-stop shop for everything you need to know in terms of backline. We'll do the same for every other position. So let's get stuck into it. In terms of premiums, I think most people will look to pick 1, 2, or maybe 3 of these fellas. We've got Michael Hurley, Elliot Yeo, Rory Laird, Michael Hibberd, and I've put Cade Simpson in this category as well. Now, I will rank them from 5 to 1, so we'll get stuck into it. And I've got Cade Simpson at number 5. It's in a pretty tough field, but I think it's quite clear that he's the one who is probably the least likely to end up on top of that group. I'll probably look to just give a comment or two on each of these players. But look, he is nearly 34. Priced at 516k. He has averaged 90 plus for the past 9 seasons, but I don't think he's the man we want to be banking on this time around. In the twilight of his career, I know Doherty's gone down, but I just don't think we're going to see real genuine premium numbers. He has only gone on 2 occasions 96 plus, despite being consistently between 90 and 95, and I think that's about where we'll see. I think we'll see an average probably somewhere in the low 90s. So I don't feel he's one that we should be starting with, in my opinion. I think some of these other guys in the premium status, all of which are over 500k, I think are far better options. In at number 4, I've got Michael Hurley, 563k, and he's extremely consistent. Now, why is he in at number 4? I think he's an extremely good player, averaged, 102 last season. The only reason he's in at number 4 is the uncertainty around key defenders and whether or not they continue to play with a bit of offensive flair. We've seen it with Rance. Obviously, Rance has had some real averages in the high 90s, but then for no real reason can drop back. And sometimes that's just the nature of the key defender. We saw similar with Scott Thompson of North Melbourne, some really good averages, then they can just sometimes drop away. I personally like to pick rebounding defenders. I feel a bit safer because their main role in the team is to find the ball and distribute it. Sometimes, depending on the game and the opposition, a key defender's role will be simply to shut down the forward. So it might only be 3 or 4 times a year where he has to play extremely defensively, but sometimes that can turn a 98 average into a 94, and sometimes that can matter. But he only scored, below 85. He was extremely consistent. 16 out of 21 85 plus scores last season, including 13 tons, a low score of 73. So really consistent. In at number 3, Elliot Yeo. He's priced at 561k. I think he'll get plenty of midfield minutes for the Eagles this season. I really like him. He has been in and out of my side. Main reason being, I think we've only seen one genuine premium season from him, and I think the Eagles are really going to struggle. I think their midfield will get smashed more often than not. It's really weak. In contrast, or I guess against that, is by it being weak, it will allow Yeo to have plenty of time in there, which gives him opportunity. But we've seen them get smashed a couple of times through the pre-season. They'll have no ruckman of genuine quality or maybe fitness early on, which can sometimes affect midfielders' scores. I think he'll be a very good option, but in terms of starting, I think we can get a bit cheaper at certain stages throughout the season. So personally, I wouldn't be starting with him, but he is a pretty reasonable option. Michael Hibberd in at number 2. Now, he was fantastic last year. Really was embracing the Melbourne game style. 545k, and he's had some really good seasons in the past, obviously. 99.2 last year, obviously missed 2016 due to the Essendon stuff. 82.1, 91.4, and 95.9. Now, I do really like him, and I think he'll be great for the D's, and he is really their main exit man, but by no means is he an out-and-out lock year on year. He's no Heath Shaw yet. He might be building towards that, but he's only had a couple of 95-plus average seasons, and at times, I remember picking him one season, I think when he averaged 91.4. He was quite easily shut down, so that's my only concern. He can and has been in the past shut down and has had some hamstring issues in the past, but I guess every player comes with their negatives and certain risks. And look, Hibberd seems to be flying, seems to be over those injuries, looking real good through the preseason. So he's very popular, and rightfully so. But look, sitting on top of the premiums, and there's no doubt about it, I think Rory Laird will be the most popular defender in 2018. He's an absolute lock for mine. I think he's just a bloke who picks himself, extremely consistent. Crows love to give it in his hands on the exit of D50. Just is a ball magnet. He's one of the rare defenders who can find it 35 plus. Now, maybe he's not the most impactful player. Probably that's fair, but he does just link up in many passages of play and just accumulates the ball. So I think he's just such an easy lock to get a high 90s, 100-something average, because he's rarely shut down. He'll get plenty of opportunity. No Brodie Smith, so there's going to be plenty of ball going through Rory Laird, and intercepts very nicely. I just think he's an out-and-out lock, and many agree because he's super popular. So that rounds out the premiums. Laird, Hibberd, Yeo, Hurley, Simpson. That's how I'm ranking them in terms of them for 2018. Now, second tier premiums, second tier that was, whether that came out right or not, we'll have to rewind that one and see what we thought there. But anyway, second tier premiums are guys that probably aren't at the absolute echelon of those guys, but are capable of getting up there. And we've got 4 of those fellas. We've got Zach Tui, Alex Rance, Jake Lloyd, and Shane Savage. Now, ranking them from 4 to 1, we've got Zach Tui in at number 4, averaged 88.1 last year. And look, he did improve his numbers at the Cats, and Geelong did like giving the ball to him, using his boot out of the back line. But I'm just not sure whether he's going to be a guy who ever finds himself breaking 95 plus. I think he's a very good player and a very good ball user, but doesn't really intercept too much, and he's not really a guy who finds it 25 plus all that often. He's probably more your mid to early 20s guy. I started him last year. He was probably not what I expected or hoped. He was good without being great, and I think we'll see similar. I sort of see his ceiling in the early 90s, and I'm not sure that's enough. In at number 3 is Alex Rance, sort of following the trend of Michael Hurley. A little bit concerned because we have seen a drop-off in numbers. He dropped to 89.5, I believe it was, last year after averages of 97 and 98.5 in 2015 and 2016. Now, he's shown, and of this group, is the only one to average in the 90s before, yet he finds himself at number 3. And I just think key defenders are so tough to judge, and I think they're far better guys to wait and see how they're going after the first month or so, and then maybe make a call. I'm really hesitant to start a key defender, so I guess Rance just falls into that. But he has averaged 85 plus for the past 6 seasons. many of those have been more so between 85 and 90, but he may be able to respond and bounce back to those heights. In at number 2 is Shane Savage, and it's a fairly tough call to split Lloyd and Savage. Averaged exactly the same last year, and both have looked fantastic through the pre-season. Savage looked extremely good in both games, and you'd have to think he's going to really up that average of 87.3. 2 JLT games, 21 touches at 86.1 disposal efficiency, and then 27 touches at 78. So, look, and he's a kicking man too. He's had, 48 touches, and 35 of those have been kicks. So, he's really a guy that's in kill to get the ball in his hands, and he distributes it nicely. And there is a bit of a sample size as well. I mean, from rounds, where is it? Let me find it. Round 16 to round 23 last year, after he returned from injury, he did average 100.3, including an extremely hot month where he pumped out ton after ton. So he's shown, in albeit a small sample size, that he can do it, and I think he's a guy to definitely consider. But I have put Jake Lloyd on top, and that's no secret because he is in my team alongside Rory Laird. He's in the prime of his career, and while he's never averaged 90 before, I think last year's average doesn't quite reflect exactly how good it was. I mean, take the first 9 rounds before he copped that concussion, not to mention he only got 4 points in there, but you can never tell how much a concussion affects a bloke's season, because he was flying. He was averaging 100.1 over the first 9 games, and just so consistent. He's not going to be a guy who pumps out too many 130s, but he will very, very regularly be between 90 and 110. So, of course, a bit of a misskewed average given that 4-point game against the Hawks, but I really like Jake Lloyd. He's been fantastic through the pre-season. 26 touches, 20 kicks, 6 handballs, just like Savage. 21 touches, 14 and 7, and that was from just 62% time on ground. So both Lloyd and Savage are the men that those clubs love to have the ball in their hand and using it off the half-back flank, and that's always a good defender to have in your side. So I really think of those guys, Lloyd and Savage are the main ones I would consider, that's for sure. I think the other two, probably not ones to start with. Now, breakout contenders, we've got 8 men in here, some of which I haven't even thought about, but obviously others have because of their ownership. Other guys in here are looking to take that next step. Others have been at that level before and might be looking to return to it. So among these names, we've got Luke McDonald, Heath Shaw, Christian Salem, Callum Mills, James Sicily, Adam Sard, Marley Williams, Andy McGrath, and yep, that rounds out the 8. Then we move on to the mid prices. So we've got 8 of those fellas, and I'll start going from 8 to 1. And in at number 8 is Sard. I don't quite understand the hype behind him. He's in 8% of size at the moment, priced at $3.99k. And I'm unsure why the hype. I know he has these dashing runs and looks extremely good at times and has some real good bouncing runs and meters gained, and he's at a new club, but at no point in his career has he shown an ability to really score, and I don't see that changing too much. He may well average higher than his 78, I think it was, but otherwise he's produced averages of 70.1 and 72.7. I don't quite see it bumping up anywhere near enough. I'd see something in the mid-80s, potentially if he gets a bit of a spike in the numbers with the new club, but I don't really see it happening. Just 1 ton last season. That's not a guy that you can be spending 400k on and just expecting him to bump up to premium status. And that should be noted. I mean, all these guys are priced around that sort of 370 plus mark, sort of up to 460. And I think if we're spending that amount of coin, we want them to really be keepers. So that's worth noting. In at number 7 is Marley Williams. Really good JLT form, some really good games in there, 22 touches and 18 touches. And like Savage and Lloyd, he seems to be the designated kicker with 18 and 7, or 15 and 7 I should say, and 14 and 4. Really good kick to handball ratio there, which we know the SuperCoach scoring system really enjoys. But his body hasn't held up in certain seasons over the course of his career. That's a concern, and I'm just not so sure at 396k that he's shown enough scoring potential previously for us to all of a sudden see that just flick a switch and change. he will be in a North Melbourne side, which I feel will struggle a lot. You know, sometimes that can be difficult because you're just not getting as much easy ball. And he is more of a man that is probably a handball receive style of player. Get the ball in his hands, go, kick it sort of type of player. So I'm not sure he'll be a viable option. In at number 6, I've got Andrew McGrath, price at $388K, 70.7 last season. Promised midfield time at the Bombers. He'll certainly get a bit of that. They do have quite a few guys who'll go through there. Of course, Merritt and Heppel are the main ones. You've got Goddard in there. You've got Myers. You've got Devon Smith, of course. Jake Stringer, the talk, he might go through there. You've got Darcy Parish and the like. But McGrath will feature in there. I'm not sure we're going to see an enormous spike in his numbers. I could see them going up potentially, well, reasonable, I suppose. 12 to 16 points. I could see him going up. Definitely, I feel he could average in the high 80s. I just don't think that's enough. I don't think you're picking him to make money. You're picking him to be a premium, and that's got to be at least in the 90s. I just don't think there'll be a big enough spike, and he's not cheap. And there's always that slight concern that, you know, he's a young man. He's still finding his way. People talk about the second-year blues. Sometimes it is difficult after your first season to just continue on that sort of upward trend. I just think I'm a big McGrath fan, but in terms of picking him this season, it's just not going to happen for me. And a guy that can probably relate in at number 5 is Callum Mills. He's a guy who has been highly touted throughout his career, and a guy that, well, hasn't really reached those heights, at least scoring-wise, just yet. And I think the big question around Mills will, can he get some midfield time? And I know he's been a really good interceptor, and he's a nice ball user. What did he average last season? 73.3. Those numbers will go up. His JLT form's been quite good. 22 touches against the Giants, 18 touches against the Lions, and that was off 59% game time. He is more of an uncontested style of player, and I'm not so sure we'll be seeing the midfield minutes just yet. As we know, the Swans midfield has plenty that run through it. You've got the cream of the crop in the likes of Parker, Kennedy, Heaney, Hanbury will return. And then they've got a lot of those role-type players who really go through there as well, in the likes of Hewitt, etc., and maybe even Papley as well. I'm not sure Mills will be upgraded to midfield status just yet. When he does, we should jump on board. But that's why he finds himself in at number 5. I think he's got great potential to increase those numbers, but I just don't quite have the confidence as much as these other 4 fellas for him to do that big time and become a premium. So that's the reasoning behind that. In at number 4 is a man that I was really excited about pre-season, but hasn't really got a chance to shine, and that's Luke McDonald. 461k, really good end of the season last year when he moved up the ground into the midfield and onto a wing. Last 5 games averaged 94.6. Clearance numbers went up, tackle numbers went up. That's a small sample size, but I did a player profile on him. I thought if we can see a bit of that through the pre-season, because North Melbourne need a classy guy through there. McDonald has a lovely left boot, and he is tough as well. And I think that's what the North Melbourne side need. They're transitioning. He's sort of that next generation style of Roo, wants to take on that leadership role and become that next big player for them, because they need him to do that. There's no doubt about that. But all we saw through the JLT was probably really a mediocre game first up, and then he was rested in the second one. So that's not enough for us. He is in that stage of his career where he's been talked about for a long time as a very promising youngster. He's now racked up 74 games, and it's about time that he transitions into the midfield and really puts a stamp on the game. And I can definitely see him doing it, but he hasn't given us enough to pick him, because for these types of players, they have potential, they have promise, and they may well do it, but for us to pick them, you really need some good pre-season form just to give you that reassuring confidence, because they're not the sort of guy that we can see, he hasn't played pre-season, he hasn't done too much, but I know what he can do. He's been doing it for years. We really need to see that confidence and see it happening in the lead up to the season proper for us to have the confidence in him that he can step up to that next level. So McDonald finds himself in at number 4. In at number 3 is Heath Shaw. Now, obviously, he's not a breakout contender. He's a man who's done it many, many years before. He is on the downward trend, and I've spoken about Shaw as well. And look, really probably most wrote him off, and then all of a sudden Wilson goes to the Dockers, Zach Williams out for the season, all of a sudden Shaw becomes relevant again. And I do think that's fair enough. Now, you might be saying, well, Shorty, you've warned us off Shaw in your player profile. You've put him in at number 3. Well, yeah, I have, but while he's in at number 3, it's fair to say you're probably only going to start 1, maybe 2 of these guys in your side. It's worth noting the breakup over these 3 categories. You want to mainly have premiums, second-tier premiums who can jump up, and then maybe take a punt on 1 or 2 of these guys. And to be honest, the bottom 6 of these guys, I haven't really considered. I've talked about McDonald and thought about, no doubt about that. Otherwise, I really haven't thought about Shaw much at all. I think his numbers will go up. He averaged 83.3 last year. He's priced at $458K. He will get more ball now, given the departure of those other 2 guys. But I just think he's at that stage where you see a guy who's been a fantastic player for so long, they just lose that yard of pace. The game doesn't seem to come to him as well as it once did, and it's always risky to pick a guy who's in that stage of his career. I can see his numbers getting up towards the 90 mark, maybe even early 90s, because he will get plenty of effective kicks, but I just don't see the quantity in touches anymore, and I think we'll see plenty of games where he gets 20 kicks and 2 handballs and those sorts of numbers. I don't feel comfortable picking him, because I think there's far more promising players who are on the up and can look at that sort of average range, where I think Shaw, while he could go up a bit, there's also the potential that he's cooked. So there is something that we've got to think about there, that all he is now is a bloke that they give it to him and he just distributes it with a nice 20-metre kick. Can he win his own ball? Is he as good in the air as he once was? He's not getting any better. And that sometimes worries me when picking a premium. But anyway, the top 2 spots, in at number 2, I've got James Sicily. Now, he's a man who's been in and out of my side, both the back line and the forward line, the last few days. And he's a tempter. He's shown at times that he could be the next big thing. That move to the back line was huge. After he did that, those last 9 rounds saw him average 98.7. Last 9 rounds, that's not including the 25 where Jed Lamb gave him an absolute nightmare. If we want to include that 25, his last 10 games averages 91.4. He's 402k. He is a guy that is very much being considered. 17% of sides he's in at the moment. The only thing that concerns me, and we saw it a little bit in the JLT, he still is prone to being sucked in, giving frees away, giving 50-metre penalties away. I'm unsure whether he's matured enough to be a genuine premium, and I think he is susceptible when he cops attention by the opposition players, that he can get sucked in and drawn into it. And the more he does get drawn into it, the more of that sort of attention he's going to get. Do I want that sort of a risk when I'm picking a guy that I want to be a premium? You know, spending 400k on a hothead who has plenty of talent but's going to throw in the odd stinker? I'm not so sure. In those last 10 games, he did throw in a 46 and a 25, and I still think that's probably what you're going to get. I think we pretty much will see what we got in that last couple of months and a half last year. You'll get an average of somewhere in the 90s, and that will be made up by scores in the 120s and 130s, and some in the 50s and 60s. I don't think he's going to be super consistent, but some days you'll love him, and some days you'll hate him. If you're prepared to take that ride, then maybe it'll pay off and he can average 95 and be a really good get. Maybe he'll have more games that's inconsistent and it'll be 88, 89. That's probably going to be the difference. But in at number 1, and it might surprise people if you're just tuning in, but if you've seen my team, I do have Christian Salem in my side. And I think he's only in 1 or 2% of teams, but I really like him. He's a talented guy, a former top 10 pick. He's been a guy that's just been wanting to get his body right for most of his career, really. A really good kick, talented, sort of smooth moving type. And he's now getting midfield time. I watched him against the Saints, was watching him and Petrarca. All I wanted to see from both of them was plenty of midfield time. And I saw that. He got the 6 clearances. He's a beautiful user of the ball. I think he complements the midfield of the Ds really nicely. So while he's priced at 437k, there is an absolute element of risk. Don't get me wrong, but I'm prepared to take that risk. I can see him averaging somewhere in the mid-90s, even if it's just 93 or 94, and that would only see his average increase about 14 or 15 points. It's not a massive ask for a bloke who's got all the talent in the world, has been around for a while, getting his body right, all the elements and all the traits of a bloke who is a breakout contender. Came back to the club over summer looking fit as a fiddle, really bulked up. Sort of gets that stage in a career where he goes, look, I need to turn this talent into on-field performance. And I just personally feel it's all going to come together for Salem this season. The body's right, the head's right, he's got the talent, he's now going to get the opportunity to play through that midfield, and I think it could all click together. And bloody hell, I hope it does, because if it goes wrong for me, well, I'm falling on my sword pretty hard. Not many others will be, because he is unique. On the flip side, if he goes well, I'm sitting very nicely with what will be, hopefully, a premium that is a bit of a POD. Moving into the mid prices, our final segment here. We've got 4 blokes there. You've got Brayshaw, you got Birchall, Riley Bonner, and Paul Seedsman. Just going to walk through them 4 to 1. And it's quite a simple one. First up, Grant Birchall's got to be at number 4. I mean, he's been ruled out for round 1, but he still is in quite a number of teams. Probably people maybe haven't updated that yet or aren't aware that he is missing round 1. But priced at 277k, he might be a guy that if he gets going through the season we'd look at. But he is also, like Heath Shaw, he's on the downward trend. Has been for a few seasons now. I don't think Birchall's been a guy that has been averaging in the 90s and playing every game for a few seasons now. He's had his trouble with his body, and he has probably gone down to more of your 85 to 88 sort of an average guy. Would have been great if he got a pre-season in. Would have been fantastic, but that knee is going to see him miss round 1, and he's got to leave our sides. Nothing shorter than that. In at number 3, Paul Seedsman. Perhaps a surprise. Probably most would have thought Riley Bonner. I'll discuss that in a second. But Paul Seedsman, there's a bit of hype about him. He's in quite a few teams. I don't have the percentage in front of me, but I know he's in quite a few. Priced at 300k after averaging about 78, I think it was, last season. Highest average in his career has been 78.9 in 2013. He's 26 years old, 69 games. I'd imagine the hype around him is the fact that there'll be opportunity for him to fill that role of Brodie Smith. So to him and Dave Mackay will probably be those running half-backs. And he's just always been touted as a fella who can play that role. And I thought he would too. I remember seeing him play a game a few years back in his Collingwood days, and I think he scored about 140, and I thought, this bloke's going to be a real star. But we haven't seen it, and I just don't think I could pick him despite being fairly cheap. And there will be upside. I think the average will move up, but I just don't see it being enough, because we've seen Seed's been around for a while now, and I just don't know if he can find it enough. I don't think he can find the ball enough to actually produce enough 90s and scores like that. He's played the 69 games, 25 touches or more in a game. He's only done it 5 times in his career. I mean, that's not much at all. I think one of those might have been in the prelim last year, but I've got my concerns. I haven't seen enough from him over his whole career, and I don't see it happening for him this season. Not enough to be a guy that we really consider, because I don't see him averaging enough to make enough money, and I certainly don't think he'll be a keeper. So that's my thoughts on him. Riley Bonner, we go down the track a bit more to 257k, so he's got a little bit more scope to make a coin, and he is far more inexperienced. There's no doubt about that. But Jasper Pittard, out with a hamstring. He'll miss a few games, one might think. Matty Broadbent with the ankle. No return date yet for him. All of a sudden, that puts Riley Bonner in the frame to be a bit of a running man out of the back line for Port Adelaide. Now, I really like him. I really love his dash. I thought he'd be a guy who played a lot more footy than he did last year. He didn't play much at all. I think just the 3 games. But I talk about sample sizes a lot. Now, this is an extremely small one, but it's interesting. He's only played the 4 AFL games, but his scores have been 76, 75, 87, I think that is. I was scribbling a few things down. Nonetheless, it was in the 80s, and 74. So he's been consistent. For a bloke who hasn't had any continuity and has been starting his career, he's already started it with scores of 70 plus. That shows and says to me that if he's out there, he's a guy who has no trouble finding it 16 to 20 times, taking a few marks, a couple of tackles, and pumping out a decent score. Can he get there in round 1 and be named, and what's his job security like? I think that's the main question we've got to ask ourselves. If he's named round 1 and and you're looking for a mid-price in the back line, I think he's a reasonable option. It's a bit of a head scratcher. I couldn't endorse him too much. I reckon I'll probably pick him in draft because I reckon he'll be floating around. Langers, Chook, if you're listening to this and you take Bonner in front of me, I'm not going to be impressed after I gave it away on this one. Nonetheless, I think he's a bloke just to think about if he does get named. Don't be surprised if he averages reasonable, if he gets a go at it. But in at number 1, and it was quite clear, is Angus Brayshaw. Clearly he was going to be number 1 there, because I personally reckon, in reality, he's the only one that you'd really consider of that crop. He's priced at 316k. He's been in my team at certain stages through the pre-season. Looks to be getting a little bit of midfield time. Of course, only played the 5 games last year. And the big concern with him is those knocks to the head. It's a big concern to his footy career. Big concern to, obviously, his life down the track. You hope that he gets through unscathed this season. And if he does, I think we'll see some really nice averages. I think he's a pretty honest pick. I think he's a guy who could definitely average somewhere in the 80s. Will he get enough midfield time? I doubt it, but that's not to say he's not good enough to score good numbers off a half-back flank, which he showed last season. Scored an 83, a 91 in the latter stages of 2017. So I think we could see some reasonable numbers from him. He tackles hard. He's hard at the pill. There's no doubt about that. A former top 3 pick or something like that, wasn't it? So he's a guy that is extremely, well, he's got plenty of potential and extremely good chance to go quite a bit up on the price range and quite a bit up, obviously, on the average. So I think he's a guy we've got to consider. 316k gives him enough room to move in the price and could give you would imagine he'd be at most people's D4, could give you reasonable points of that while making a bit of coin as other premiums drop a little bit. So I can definitely see the theory behind picking Brayshaw. So that sums it up, guys. And while it is another relatively lengthy video, some people don't love the lengthy videos, and that's understandable. But I really think if you've got any decisions or debates going on in your own mind about the back line, I'd like to think we've covered it off pretty nicely through this video. We've spoken about just about every relevant player, and I've given my opinion on them, albeit a small little snippet on them. But hopefully it just helps you sway you either way, or just help you make that final decision as we lead in to the last few days of the pre-season. So hopefully it's been helpful. Hopefully you've stayed the journey and listened into the full thing. If not, if you've seen bits and pieces and jumped ahead to certain ones you're interested in, that's totally fine as well. So hopefully it's been of some benefit to you. But look, thanks for tuning in once again. Keep subscribing away. Obviously I want to hit 1200 by round 1, and we're closing in on that very quickly. I'll have a team update for you guys very soon. We'll be doing these sort of looks at each position over the next 4 to 5 days. I'll have the must-haves. I'll have the SuperCoach traps like last year as well. And of course, we'll be talking plenty of SuperCoach, hopefully on the daily. I'll have SuperCoach leagues coming to you as well, the subscriber league. So stay tuned for when those will be coming out. I'll be giving you a heads up on that pretty shortly. So thanks again. Subscribe away, comment away, and I'll talk to you soon. Cheers.